Today is Thursday, October 2nd, 2014, and this is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Dick Speir. Mr. Speir is 88 years old, having been born on July 8th, 1926. My name is Julie Minley, Manuscripts Assistant at the Hay Center, and I will be conducting this interview. Okay, Mr. Speir, can you tell me what war, the branch of service, and the years that you served, please?
Okay. First of all, we were almost all wartime, our class of 1944 from Sandusky High School, where we both graduated. The war started in December 7th, of course, of our freshman year, and so the rest of our school association was during wartime. You know. And in fact, looking at some of the pictures in our yearbook, there must have been at least a dozen guys in their uniforms, because they took them out of as soon as they turned 18, no matter where they were in school, they were taken into the draft.
Really?
So in my case, since my birthday followed just shortly after graduation in June of 1944, at that time, if you so desire, you could enlist in the service of your choice.
Right.
And at that time, I wanted to enlist in the Navy. But at that time, in Erie County, they were only taking 2 a month into the Navy service.
Really? And
so they had 2 already selected for Erie County, and I was an alternate in case one of them didn't show. And it happened, one of them didn't show. And so just the day before my 18th birthday, I was sworn into the Navy. Now, if I would have delayed one more day, then I would have been in their hands. I would go wherever they had need for people at that time. So I just got into the Navy of my choice, just by the skin of my teeth, you might say. Yeah. I went from there then to Camp Perry, Virginia.
Okay.
And this is located right outside of Williamsburg, Virginia. It was a CB camp. CB's Construction Battalion, that's what that stands for.
Okay.
And they were build roads, they build the airfields over on Saipan and so on.
Okay.
And so at that time, they were taking some Navy people in there. So I went through boot camp then at Williamsburg. At that time, it was a 12-week program. So I came out of boot camp then about October 10th or 12th, somewhere along in there.
Now, was this the first time you had been away from home, away from family?
Yep.
At that time?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was that boot camp like a shock to you? Like,
yes.
Was it a change of pace, culturally, physically?
The lowest point of my career, I would say, was that first day when I got into boot camp.
Really?
And I was sitting in by myself at a picnic table, and they had I don't know what the cafeteria was there, but I can remember eating celery with cheese on it and so on. And, this is, and I'm all by myself, And then finally they took us to a place where we could bunk for the night. And then the next day, we were all taken out into the big field, or big courtyard, buildings all around it. And we all stood in a line there, and we were instructed to take all our clothes off. And they gave us a little box, about 10 inches square. And we had to tuck everything into the box, everything. And it had a mailing label on it, and we addressed it to our home, and that was the end of our civilian clothes. Then we had a long line of it was a long counter that extended for 100 feet or so, and it was divided off into sections. In one section they threw underwear at you. In another section they threw your jeans and so on. And then your dress uniform, your whites for summer. Everything was dished out. When they first of all, they give you a big white sack, which was a cover for a mattress. and it was called a fart sack. So you held that, and they threw everything in it. You know. So anyway, I went. Then we were sent to our barracks. We had these little round Quonset huts, and it held 60 guys in 2 huts.
Okay.
And that was a company of 60.
Okay.
And as the first thing that the chief wanted to know was if anybody could type. And Mary and I had both taken 2 years of typing in high school. I was preparing to be a stenographer, I guess.
Okay.
And also shorthand. And so because I could take typing and shorthand, I became the company clerk. And so from then on, all the records were kept by me. I had to make sure they all got their shots and they all got their haircut at the right time, and they all went to the firing range at the right time, and so on. So that was, of course, I had to participate with them, but anyway, I was involved with that. So then while I was there, they gave you a test to see if there was any skills that you may have that would be useful in their work.
Okay.
And so I had a counselor to give me tests and so forth, and I asked at that time, because I played a musical instrument, whether or not there was any possibility of getting into a band.
Oh.
Because the thing was at this era, which is entirely different now, all the major ships, large carriers, battleships, heavy cruisers, all had a band on board.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And these bands were composed of 23 pieces. Of those 23 pieces, there were in there 15 people who played specifically saxophones, trombones, trumpets, because we were playing the big band music of the time. Glenn Miller stuff.
That makes sense.
Okay? Which used 5 saxes. We had 3 trombones and 4 trumpets, bass, drums, piano in that group. Besides that, then we had a couple that played French horn, one that played bass drum, one that played a baritone euphonium.
Okay.
And these instruments then filled out the band such that you could play concert music, because they had French horns in there, and flutes and stuff like that. And some of them, of course, played both.
Right.
You know, played in both bands. Like the trombones, we played in both bands. So anyway, we had, and then in my picture there, I have a picture of these 2 different bands taken at the School of Music in Washington, D.C.
Really?
Okay. So anyway, I asked them whether I could, whether there was any chance of getting into a band, and they said, well, you'll have to sign up for 6 years, because this was the hitch at that time. I don't know what it is now. I think it's less than that.
Yeah.
But you signed up for a 6-year hitch. And I wasn't too sure that I wanted to tie myself down that, you know. He said, but he said, come back in a week. He said, there are a lot of changes being made. Now come on back and see me in a week. So I went back a week later, and sure enough, they said, you don't have to get into the School of Music, you don't have to sign up in the, what we call the regular Navy. You could go into the, I forget what they called it right now. But anyway, it was in the Navy, but you were only in for the duration or whenever they choose to let you go.
Got it.
And so it said you could go in under those conditions, you know. So he arranged then for, there was a band there at Williamsburg, or at Camp Perry, just like there were bands in all the other Navy bases besides on the ships. They all had bands. And so the director of the band then arranged for me to take an audition. And so they gave me a trombone, and I sat in the middle of the room with this music stand, and they gave me some music to play. And he said, okay, he says, this will get you in. Well, I never took that seriously. I completely took it out of my mind.
Really?
We came through boot camp and came home for a 10-day leave, went back to what they call OGU, that's outgoing unit, where they would then assign you to someplace, a ship, shore, wherever, anywhere. So I had no idea where I was going from there. So after a couple of days there, we were set out on duty, like scrubbing floors or whatever, just picking up litter or whatever, just to keep us busy. Well, one day I didn't have anything to do, and there was a big auditorium building like nearby, so I went over and looked inside. It was empty, but there was a room in there, and there were some musical instruments. So I spent the next couple hours just playing on a trombone in there. I came back after that, and this was late in the afternoon. I came back to my Quonset hut, and the guy said, "Where in the hell have you been? Well, your name's been on the PA system all afternoon. You better get your ass up there."
Oh no! You're like, oh.
So I went up to what they call top side. That's where the offices are, top side, just like in a ship.
Sure.
And so he said, "Get your sea bag packed." He said, "You're leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning for Washington, D.C. for the School of Music."
Really? I bet you were happy.
Oh, God. So the low point was in my first day at Camp Perry, but that was one of the highlights.
Highlights of getting that assignment.
Yeah. So there was one other fellow in our group that went into some sort of schooling.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other guy was a watchmaker, and he went into something
really?
having to do with instruments, instrument repair or whatever. So he and I were together then, went from Williamsburg up on the train to Washington, D.C., and there was a steak truck sitting there waiting for us. So we sat in the back of this steak truck, and I can imagine driving by, and there's the Capitol right there. Oh my God. So I came out to Anacostia. This is the name of the area along the Anacostia River where the Navy School of Music was then. Okay. It was since changed to Norfolk in more recent years. And now they take not only Navy but also Army personnel as well now. But at that time it was just Navy at Anacostia. And this is within the borders of Washington, D.C. on the river. So I went out there, and anyway, for about a week I was buffing floors while they waited to get me into a routine there. And then I took another audition on my instrument, and from that then I found out, like, for example, there was one instance where about 20 guys came in and 11 of them didn't pass the test, even though they had been sent by somebody. But when their standards there at the school, they didn't make the grade.
So then they just get sent back?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, from then on, I was assigned to play in various bands, and they would change every so often, get different instructors and so forth. We practiced different kinds of music and so on. And they had other courses there too that we could take if we wanted to, like arranging.
Oh, okay. Musical courses?
Yeah, learning chord structure and things like that. Also history courses in music. And a lot of those I took and paid a tuition because it was part of Washington Washington University.
Really?
So I was able to take courses there. It didn't mean anything to me in the long run, and it was something that I enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
So we were there then. I went in there in November of 1944, and then in early February we were put into a band that's going to be band number 79. The bands that were on the three battleships at Pearl Harbor that were destroyed, they were bands 21, 22, and 23.
Really?
Ours was band 79. So you have an idea how many bands were out there in the fleet. And each one of them was 23 pieces.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, band 79. And after a 10-day leave at home and so on, we were on the train and went out to Camp Shoemaker in California, which is just 50 miles from San Francisco. We were there then for a few days while they were arranging for transportation for our band. And so then we were out on Treasure Island during this time. And we left then from Treasure Island on to what's called an APA, Attack Personnel, APA. I forget what the last name was for. Anyway, it was a ship that had bunks in it, stacked 6 high,
Okay.
that could carry a couple thousand men.
Wow.
And also it had superstructure on board that they could load landing craft into the water.
Wow.
Yeah. So this was the
Huge.
ship. We were just on it as passengers.
Okay.
So for the next 4 days, the worst days of my life was being almost seasick on a nasty Pacific winter weather. This was in February, you know. Then after about 4 days, it got sunny, and now we're coming into Hawaii, into Pearl Harbor.
Really?
And so we were in Pearl Harbor then for a couple weeks, and while we were there, they had to keep you busy. So some of them were out there digging graves by hand with a shovel. One of my jobs was to steer a army truck while somebody towed it with another vehicle from some place where they were being torn apart or whatever down to another place. So I was steering trucks down. But then the last couple of days while we were there, we were approaching Sunday. And they thought it would be neat if our band would sing the Catholic masses on a Sunday morning. So we spent about 3 days, the last 3 days, learning Kyrie eleison.
Oh, I know that song.
You know that one?
Oh, yeah.
Kyrie eleison.
I've sang that one.
Yeah, okay. And so we sang then for our Catholic masses on a Sunday morning, and that afternoon we were escorted out to an aircraft carrier. We got on board, and this is the first time we knew where we were going. We had no idea where we were going. And we got on aboard this carrier, and there was a map there, and there was a line drawn from Hawaii over to Guam. And then we learned there that after we got to Guam, we were going to be taken to Saipan. So that was the first we knew of that. So the next 2 weeks, it took us to go from Hawaii over to Guam.
Now, were you seasick on that ride?
Pardon me?
Did you get seasick on that ride too?
No, it was a sunny. The waves were just like, like 3 or 4 foot waves.
Nice.
It was wonderful. But every night at 6 o'clock, and of course, when you're down in the tropics, sunset is early.
Mm-hmm.
Always about the same time.
Yeah.
6:30, around there. And that's the part we didn't like too well, because then we had to turn off all the lights. All the lights on the ship were turned off because we were in Japanese waters.
Oh, okay.
And there were submarines out there. We weren't alone. There was, along with us, there were 3 other troop ships and 2 what they call escort carriers.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
They're like a little destroyer, but they're smaller, and they're used to kind of go around and keep visual. Supposedly, and I don't know what, but they thought they had detected a Jap sub.
I was just going to ask you if you ever ran into anything.
And they sent out depth charges at that time, but then we never saw any debris or anything, so it may have been just a false alarm. We don't know. But anyway, they were on the alert for that. So then we arrived over in Guam, and we spent just 1 day there, and the next evening we got on what's called an LCI. This is a landing craft infantry, and they're made just for there's
like a back gate, and it just drops
open. A gate comes
open
down so they can rush off into the water.
It's kind of like when they did it,
when you saw D.D.
Yes,
pictures. Exactly.
Omaha Beach and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So we spent the night on a little LCI going 100 miles from Guam up to Saipan. So that took all night long.
I bet.
Yeah. The next morning, about 6 o'clock, we're coming in, and here what we see is a mountain. Saipan is just in the peaks of a mountain range, on there. Saipan is about 15 miles long, north and south, and about 3 or 4 miles wide.
Wow.
So it's not a real big island. But the whole southern part of the island was flat. And that's where they made the B-29 airfields.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And so every night they would take off at about 9 o'clock, and they would do their mission to Japan. And every morning at about 8 o'clock they would be coming right over our heads as they were heading for the landing field, which is only a couple miles from Tanapeg, which was the name of the Navy base that we stayed at. All the time that we were at this Navy base, we played every day, 2 or 3 times a day.
Now, what were the reasons that you played?
Okay, one of them was they would have on the beach, the west side of the island was all beach.
Okay.
This is where the troops all landed. The west side of the island was a cliff. That was all cliff along there. So,
okay.
I'm sorry, the east side of the island was all cliff. The west side was all sandy beach. This is where we were located. 20,000 Japanese fought off the Americans there. Of the 20,000, about 400 survived of the Japanese. I don't know how many thousand we lost within 2 days. You know, so all the while I'm there, and even ever since that time, I feel guilty.
Yeah, that's it's hard to put a number on it.
You think that I was having a good time? Well, thousands lost their lives there.
In that short span of time.
Yeah. The north part of the island, the very northern part of the island, was called Marby Point. It was a cliff that was a couple 100 feet high. The Japanese families that lived in it, because here we had 20,000 Japanese soldiers there.
Right.
But a lot of them, there were families there too. They were so afraid of the Americans coming in that they all rushed up to Marby Point, and mothers holding their children dived off the cliff and drowned into the ocean. Hundreds of them drowned at Marby Point. Anyway, getting back to the beach then, the ships, this is a harbor there, and it was just filled all the time with all kinds of ships. You get to think of battleships, carriers, destroyers, transports, whatever. Anyway, the sailors would come in if they had an afternoon free or something like that to get off the ship.
Right.
And so they had a fence along there, and they were kept, so they couldn't wander into anywhere else, kept them on the beach, but they gave everybody 3 cans of beer. And we would sit there every afternoon for at least like 2 hours and play the big band music for them. Yeah. And all of them would just sit on the sand and just sit there by the hour, drinking their beer and listen to us play. Then they had other places where a building where the chiefs could meet inside. So they would step up.
The officers
Yeah. And they had all the beer they wanted. And they would, ask the band if they would play a certain number, and if we did, they'd come up there with a whole case of beer for us.
He's like, sure, I'll play.
There was only one time in my life I ever got sick.
Really?
I mean, from drinking. And I'm not a drinker. But another buddy of mine in the band, we decided to see how many beers we could drink, And we came home slobbered that day. And I was really sick, and I never, I'll drink a beer.
Yeah.
I like 1 beer, maybe 2 at the very, very most, But anyway, that was where and we would play there maybe like once or twice a week, and at a different time than when we played for the enlisted men. Then, on Saturday night, now we're going to play for the officers. And they had nurses on the island, of course, because this was also a hospital.
Oh.
And we would bring in wounded from other areas of conflict if they were salvageable.
Okay.
And brought them to the island there. And so they had nurses there. And so the officers all had their nurses there. And so there, we would play for about 3 hours, and we would have 2 intermissions, and each time they would give us whatever kind of a mixed drink we wanted, So I always had a whiskey sour.
Did you?
Yeah.
Do you like it till this day?
I don't know. I don't know whether I have one since then. So we would have one we would probably have maybe 2 or 3
Yeah.
during the course of the evening, But that was always Saturday night. And then after we got done playing at about midnight, the mess hall was open. And so we'd go down there and have spaghetti at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, gosh.
But every morning at 8 o'clock, we had to be out there playing colors for the flag.
Oh, okay.
All the while, there would be some Japanese sitting along the way, just prisoners, pounding on rocks, making little walls and stuff like that. Prisoners.
Really?
These were Japanese that were still hiding up in the hills that were refused to surrender.
Really?
And so they would send these military up there with searchlights at night, because they would come down during the night and steal food out of the barracks. These are Japanese soldiers.
Really?
Yeah. And they would come down sometimes during the night. Well, no, always during the night, to try to find something to eat, because they were up there in the wilderness, And there were some that were still there in the 1950s. I'm talking about 1945,
Wow.
And there were still some hiding up there. They finally gave up in the 1950s on that island. Yeah. So that was the kind of routine that we went through every day. And at the time, it seemed kind of desolate, But I can't complain, I can't complain about the food we had, it was decent,
Yeah, because if you think, everything had to be shipped in, because it's not a self-sustaining area.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So...
How long were you on that island?
Well, we arrived on the island on the 1st of April. And I can remember just 12 days later, we learned that President Roosevelt died, April 12th. So we were there then from the 1st of April until the 1st of May of the following year.
Wow.
So we were there 13 months.
Over a year.
But the war was over in August 15th of 45. So as soon as the war was over, they started bringing the men home. And they had what they called a point system.
Yes,
You had a
I've heard of
point
that.
for every month that you were in the service. You had 2 points for every month that you were overseas.
Okay.
And so all these points then would add up. So the highest number of points come home first, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the guys in our band had already been in bands previously. They had been in for a couple of years. So we weren't all out of boot camp.
Got it.
There were some, I was only a seaman at that time.
Okay.
I finally earned my first stripe, musician, 3rd class, petty officer.
Aww.
And then there's 2nd class, 3rd class, and then chief.
Okay.
And so we had 1st and 2nd class stripes in our band. So they were in for quite a while before us young ones were there. So when the war was over right away, those old guys left within a month or two. They were on their way home.
Really?
So that really put a strain on our band. We had to do all kinds of manipulating to try to keep the instrumentation solvent enough to play anything meaningful.
Right.
And like, for instance, the concert band, we lost our tuba player right away, and so since I knew how to play a valve instrument, well, I played tuba. We had a couple other youngsters that played trombone, so they could carry the trombone parts, and so I played tuba then in the concert band because I knew how to do that, So, so anyway, it decimated down. It got worse and worse, And then our chief left, and then a young lieutenant who was a terrific piano player. He just loved having that band, so he took that over as his hobby, So we were under his arms then for a few months, Well, then finally we got the call to go home, and I think about 5 or 6 of us left at that same time. And that was about the end of the band over there.
Yeah.
And interestingly, we left our instruments there, but we got on our ship from there back to San Francisco was a reconverted Italian liner, cruise ship
Really?
converted into personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And would you know that on that ship they had a whole array of musical instruments? And so we got
Did you?
a band together, a little group we had, and so we would play for groups
Oh,
on,
that's
the, on
cool.
the ship, you know.
Hmm.
When we went over, we crossed the date line, and it was Good Friday when we were on the east side of the date line, and when we crossed it, it was Easter. So we had Good Friday, and the next day was Easter because we skipped
Yeah,
the day.
you didn't do.
Skipped the day crossing
Yeah.
the date line. On the other hand, when we came back, it was Sunday, and we played, or I have two church bulletins. One is on Sunday, but the next day was Sunday again. Because instead of it being Monday, we lost a day. So we
Right.
had 2 Sundays in a row.
Oh my gosh. Aw.
So we came back to San Francisco and back to Treasure Island. I was there for a week or so until they arranged for train transport. And here again, it was troop trains, all full of retired, about to be retired personnel,
Okay.
service personnel. And I was dropped off at Great Lakes and got my discharge there on June 13th, 1946. That's my story.
That's your story. While you were over there, did you get letters? Did you write letters home?
Oh, every day. I wrote to Mary one day, and I wrote to my folks the next day. But she wrote to me every day.
Did you?
Yeah,
Oh,
wrote to me every day.
Oh.
And I write a letter every day, but one went to her and one went to my folks. However, of course, during the 7 or 8 months that the war was still going on,
Mm-hmm.
our letters would be cut into little ribbons by our chief, who would have to read all our letters, make sure we weren't giving away any secrets.
I've
you know.
heard that.
Yeah, and we made up a little code before we left, so that when I would say, I got a letter from Aunt Helen today, well, that was a letter of the alphabet. So I was able to tell them I was on Saipan.
Oh, look at you, smarty lad.
Well, a lot of guys did that, and I'm sure the people who were during the reading these letters
Right.
knew that was going on too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they knew where I was early on.
Okay. Do you still keep in contact with anybody?
No.
Did you at one time, I guess?
No, we didn't. It's one of those things we all kind of disintegrated piece by piece.
Okay.
You know, we didn't all leave at once where we agreed, well, give me your address.
Right.
And we never did that. And I think that's strange that we didn't, because we were together, you know, day and night for months.
Yeah, and having that common bond of that music.
Doing everything together all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that we would have written letters. Oh, I had some addresses. And I remember one of our trips, we were in Boston, and I called one of the fellows who I knew lived there, and I found his name in the telephone book, stuff like that. But we never did. We never did
No?
that. Yeah. I'm sorry now about that. Yeah. They have a Navy association. I forget what its exact name is, but it's for people that were in Navy bands, and they meet every year.
Really?
And I should belong.
Yeah, you should.
You know, and they all have their meetings like down in Florida,
Right.
you know, and so on. And everybody should do this. I keep
Yeah.
thinking they would. And I know there would be very few back in my era.
Right.
Very, very, very few. Because I've seen them on YouTube. I've watched a lot of them on YouTube meetings, you know, and I see the bands, and they're all much younger than me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would probably not run into anybody that way. This North Coast band I was telling you about before is composed of about 70 musicians from anywhere from Sandusky to Toledo. The director of our band is he enlisted in the Navy to be a Navy musician.
Okay.
And he was from Cleveland, and he spent a year at the School of Music.
Wow.
And then he was in the band at Pearl Harbor. The bands, as I mentioned to you, the number of them, the only bands that I knew existed in more recent times was one in Pearl Harbor, one in Japan, And there's one in Chicago. It's called the Great Lakes Navy Band, Great Lakes Navy Band.
Okay.
And then, of course, the official Navy Band in Washington.
Right.
But I think I learned that the Navy Band in Honolulu has been disbanded. So they're all disappearing. But this director of our band, he was a trumpet player in the band at Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
In more recent years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a school, he was a band director over at Elmore and retired now. So he directs our North Coast band. So.
Okay.
But we have kind of a special bond because we were both in
Yeah.
the School of Music, you know, and
That's
stuff
cool.
like that. Yeah.
Did you, when you came home, what'd you do when you came home? Did you get married, go to school,
Well, I
go
went
to
to
work?
Ohio State.
Okay.
I got out in June, and in September I went to Ohio State, and I wanted to go into the marching band, and on the way down, my parents took me down, and on the way down, we had car trouble. And there was no way, we didn't have any buses or anything going to Columbus from Sandusky, you know, and so I didn't make it for the tryouts for the band. So I did the following year. So I was in the marching band 3 years out of the 4.
Were you?
Yeah. And our 4th year, Michigan, we played Michigan and won by a field goal in the last seconds of the game, and therefore we went to the Rose Bowl.
Oh, neat.
And we went on a train. It took us 5 days to get there. And so we played in the Rose Bowl. That was
Nice.
1949 in December, but the game was not played on Sunday, January 1st, because they didn't play football on Sundays then. So we played, the game was on the Monday after New Year's Day.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we performed for the halftime, and as soon as the game was over, we went immediately onto a train right there and headed for home. We were late for a class, I think, one day, and we had special permission to come in late.
Wow.
So then after that, I majored in mathematics and physics and biology as a minor.
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill, or did you have?
Absolutely.
Did you? Okay.
Absolutely.
That's always one of my questions.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
In fact, at that time, we got paid $60 a month.
Okay.
And our books and our tuition, everything was paid. And then we got married in '48 after 2 years in the school at school.
Okay.
And then it jumped from $60 to $105. Yeah. So when we got, and then she worked as a secretary at a company down in Columbus for 2 years. So when we came out, you know, we were debt free. Yeah.
Wow.
What a wonderful thing. Absolutely.
Wow.
So I came back to Sandusky and taught math and science at Sandusky High School.
Did you really?
And then in 1967, I started in 1950.
Okay.
Graduated from Ohio State in 50. In 1957, we opened up what was called the Supplementary Educational Center, which was a separate building attached to, or another addition to the high school, where we had a library, and that's where Mary worked for a while. We had an education materials center, which had 16 millimeter films, because that was it. We didn't have video, you know. So we had a large library of films and film strips. We had a cultural center for art displays, which still operates, and a planetarium, which still operates. So after I was there 2 years, the director unfortunately passed away. So I then was made director of this operation, this center, and we served 16 school districts.
Oh, wow.
In all of Erie County, Huron County, and eastern Ottawa County. 16 school districts would order materials from our center, and we
Okay.
had a delivery system to send that out to them.
Hmm.
So I worked there then until I retired officially in 1987, and then I stayed on half-time operating the planetarium until 2001,
Wow.
and I still do Sunday programs for the public there.
Wow.
That's it.
Did you guys have any kids?
We have three. Our first was a daughter, born in 1950, and the second one was another daughter born in 1954, and a son in 1957. The oldest daughter, has two daughters of her own.
Mhm.
One is married to a very advanced member of Microsoft
Wow.
in Charlotte, Virginia.
Okay.
No, North Carolina. Charlotte, North Carolina. The second daughter is unfortunately became a widow when her husband was shot and killed. It was a policeman. You undoubtedly knew about the policeman in Sandusky that was
No,
shot and killed
That's our
3 years ago.
granddaughter. That's our
Oh.
Yeah,
granddaughter.
that was my
It's
granddaughter's.
all spot. My husband's a state trooper, so
Yeah.
I feel for that, because that's one of my fears. So.
And the second daughter has a daughter, and she's a grief counselor for a hospice. in Sandusky.
Okay.
And then our son has 3 children. The oldest is a boy. The second one is the one I told you about that lives here in Fremont.
Right.
And the third one is a freshman in high school. That's it.
Looking back at your experience, do you think you would do it again?
Oh, in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, God, yes. I couldn't think of anything else in the world that
Really?
I want to do. Absolutely not. No.
Good. Well, anything you want to add that I didn't ask? Or you?
No, I think I talked long enough.
Yeah, I
didn't
think you did
My
great.
God.
What do you got here?
10 to 4?
40 minutes.
Yeah.